So this is session 2 of our recipe to product. So today we're going to be working on how to actually create your recipe. And this is the fun part. This is the part where your creativity comes to life. This is the part that I enjoy. I would literally stay up if I need to have a recipe really be perfected. And this is really important because this is where you really set the tone for your brand, and you get to really set that tone of what kind of ingredients, the quality of the ingredients you're using, the brands that you're using. It's just a fun part of actually doing it. And I like working as soon as you want to create your product. I like to just straight go ahead and work on the recipe instead of doing so much of research, or what's the word I'm looking for? The technological part of it, or maybe the legality part of it, because once you have a recipe that you're excited about, it really helps you to do the work and to put in the time that you need to make sure that your brand gets out there. Because once I created my recipes, it's like, oh my God, everybody got to taste this. Like I was like Oprah, you get a taste, you get a taste, you get a taste. So it really helps you to keep you excited. It helps to keep you motivated. So that's why I want to start first with the recipe, and then we will work out the legality, the branding, the packaging, and all of that good stuff after you have your recipe. Now, a recipe is very important, and it's important, and that's why I really had to do this workbook that, it really helps to have an archive somewhere that your recipe are written, because it is going to improve. You're going to update it with time. You're going to change things with time. And you need something that you can always go back to, that you don't have to try to remember. Trying to remember a recipe is just automatic failure, because that means that your product cannot be commercially manufactured. So if you weren't there, then they couldn't make it. If you're saying that, okay, I know my recipe in my head, I know I'll taste it to get it to where I need it to be. But really, it needs to be where you take what is in your head and you literally make it plain on a piece of paper, and you write it down, and you keep adding and keep subtracting until you have that perfect recipe. And especially when you start mass producing, you have to update that, because making one pot or one batch of a recipe is totally different than when you're making maybe a ton or 1,000 pounds of that same recipe. And some things have to reduce, add, all of that good stuff. And when you do the math, the most important thing about this part that I learned the hard way is that do your math and do it right the first time, so that later on, all you have to do is literally just do math and just do your measurements. And so it's important to do this part. And you're going to get a recording of this as soon as we finish. I started using the cloud. I didn't use it last time, so I wasn't able to send you the link. But for today and future presentations, I'll have the link sent back to you, so you have the recording, so you can watch it later on when you're working on your own recipe. So like I was saying, the most important thing is really doing the math and weighing your stuff right the first time, so that later on when you need to adjust, you can just do math. Because if you don't do it right the first time, then you have to keep doing things all over again. So I say this to say that the things that you need to create your recipes are only two things, really. It's just your food scale and your measuring spoons, which you're going to see me use today. So once you have your measuring spoons and your scale, then you can either choose which, for the most part, you will use ounces. I know when I created a product in Africa, in my home country, in Cameroon, they work in kg. And thank God that I took my scale on that was in ounces, because I would have had a hard time trying to convert them back, which I still had to do when I used their products that maybe had the weight on the bag. I still had to convert it. So using that conversion on Google, just Google convert, 1 tablespoon of salt to, ounces or pounds or whatever. It helps to know your metrics. That's the word I'm looking for. Your metrics. Your metrics are very important. It's important when you're going to be shopping for your batch. is important when you're going to be sourcing your ingredients. It's important because, let's say, for example, for us, since we use a lot of flour, it's important for me to know how many bags of our products, a 25-pound bags versus a 50-pound bags or 10-pound bags, how much will it give me? So if I know that my recipe, I use half a pound of flour, yeah? So it's easy for me to know that, okay, if I use half a pound of flour for one batch, for one bag of my product, then a 25-pound bags, this is how much it would give me. So it's easy for me to say, okay, if I'm trying to make 100 bags, this is how much flour I need. The same thing for sugar, the same thing, like say for our recipe, we use sugar, salt, yeast, and all of that. All of that, you need to choose a metric that works for you, that is easy for you to work with, if it's pounds or ounces or kg, or say kg, kilograms, whatever works for you. And then you just make sure that you, even if it's 0.001 ounce or pound, it's definitely important to record everything. Now, another thing to really take note of is that while you're making your recipe, you have to be recording it. Like literally, you have to have, I forgot, another important thing you need to have is, if you don't have the handbook, then, piece of paper or a book, a handbook or plan is fine. You have a pencil. I recommend using a pencil so that way you can just easily erase stuff and rewrite it instead of having a lot of scrabbles all over the place. And so you need to have somewhere that you're recording. And that's why we have this part over here that you're recording, everything that you're doing. If you miss one thing, you will have to redo the whole batch just to figure out what you miss. So even if you're cooking, let's say, for example, today I'm going to be making I'm actually going to create a recipe today so that we're both doing this together and you can kind of see how that goes. I'm going to make something. We have a peanut butter sauce that we eat with rice or with any other thing that you like to make. So I'm going to make some peanut butter sauce today. So while you're cooking, if your product is a cooked product, my other products are not cooked. So it's a little bit tricky because I have to mix it and then I have to just taste the dough to see what is missing or what is not missing and then add as I go. So while you're cooking, I think it might be even easier when you're cooking, because if it's a cooked product or half cooked product, then even if you add a pinch of salt, you got to record it. And you need measuring spoons, like all the measuring spoons from the largest. I know some of them don't have like the tiny little spoons, so sometimes you have to get that separately, but make sure that you have the one that goes down all the way to literally a pinch of salt. There's a pinch of salt somewhere here. Yes, there is. This is just a pinch of salt, and then this is like 1/4 of a teaspoon and everything, but these are your best friends. And that's easier to use. And then I use a scale as well to weigh it just to have the conversion. I don't have a scale in here, it's in my office, but you get the idea. So once you have it in that spoon, in this things or whatever, it's good to just weigh it, maybe weigh the spoon or whatever cup. Of course, this is not going to be able to stand on a scale, but whatever cup that you have or bowl that you can put, weigh the bowl separately, and then put your ingredients in there and weigh it so that you have it in ounces, or you have it in pounds, or even both for your records. Because if you're trying to figure out how much salt to buy for a batch, knowing the tablespoon or teaspoon is not going to do good. You still have to convert it. Now, you don't have to do that because you literally could, like I said, you can Google it and convert it online and just say, okay, convert half a tablespoon of salt to ounces or to pounds or whatever, or kilograms, and it'll tell you. You just do the scale just so you are as accurate as possible and searching, and you just have to take the extra step. But I've used Google plenty times. So yeah, so once you have that, if you're making a sauce or you're making a cooked product or you're baking or whatever it is, the list thing that you add, and as you keep adding, you keep writing down. You keep adding, you're writing down. If you add a pinch of salt, you have to literally cook. You can't cook with your hands when you're putting a recipe together. You're cooking with measuring spoons. That's literally, I think if I had to say it any simpler, it would be that you literally don't use your hands, you don't use anything else. You have, which they have bigger measuring cups as well, which I have them over there. But you literally forego every other thing, your hands, bowls, everything, and you're using strictly measuring spoons. So that way, once you add something, you record, okay, right next to your recipe, you can just put a plus sign, plus, 1 tablespoon. You taste it. It doesn't taste the way you want it to taste, plus this, plus that, so that way, when you're done, you're going to have a lot of scribble scrabble all over the place. And then you're able to now rewrite your recipe in a cleaner section, and you have something concrete. And the goal is that your recipe should be simple enough, have metrics where it's easy to mass produce, it's easy for you to repeat, it's easy for somebody who doesn't know your recipe to duplicate the same thing as you have it. And don't know if I need to mention that, but your recipe is something that is very sacred. It's very, what is the word? Sacred, or it's just something very special that I don't think anybody knows my recipe. And I've been doing this for 8 years now. I think the only person that has my recipe now is my mom, because she actually goes into our factory to help me do the mixing when I'm not able to. So, but before that, it was only me that knew, only I knew the recipe, because I didn't really want to spend the money to do a trade secret. And eventually I probably will do that. If it's something that you're interested in doing, you could do it, but it's not really necessary, because when I did my research, it's very easy for you to do your own self trade secret. One of the ways that I know you can do your recipe, which it's not really, that works more on other if you're trying to trademark or have a patent that you don't want to pay for, you can mail yourself a certified letter of your recipe and never open it, and just keep it, should in case something happens, God forbid, somebody steals your recipe and duplicates it. That is your proof that you created this in 2022, and if somebody comes out with another duplicate of yours in 2023, you have that proof that, hey, I have a letter that the post office sent to you, and you can't open it, and you just save it for your keepsake. But I just decided to keep my recipe to myself, and just keep it somewhere safe. If it's on my phone, it's locked somewhere safe, my books or whatever. I don't just leave it, hanging around. Employees cannot have your recipes, or you can't just have it laying around where somebody can easily duplicate your recipe. Now, that's never really happened to me, thank God. But those are just precautions, just to be alert, so that if tomorrow somebody's like, oh, let me just make it for you, or what did you put in here, and what or whatever the situation, you just have in the back of your head that is something dear to you. That is something that you have to keep to yourself. Not even close family members. Not, like I said, the only reason my mom ended up having a recipe was when she, it had been years. This is recently. This is probably 2 years ago, where I finally gave her the recipe, and she can go in, because at the end of the day, once you tell one person, then that one person has a best friend, and then that best friend has a best friend, and you just don't know where it could go to. So I had to definitely make sure that I talked to her about the importance of not sharing my recipe. Another thing as well is that if you're making a recipe from fresh, let's say fresh products, like we're going to do today, let's say you're doing tomatoes or vegetables, or fresh greens or whatever, it's easier to measure them if you either chop them up really small or you get a puree. So today I'm going to do more of a puree. So that way it's easy for me to just scoop a spoon of this and put it in, because once it's in the chunks, if it's in big chunks and all that situation, it's hard for you to really get an accurate read, if that makes sense. So it's better to just puree it if it's something that you're making where you don't have to see the chunks. Now, if it's something that you do have to see the chunks, like maybe if your onions needs to be in visible, then yeah, you can still chop them up and then just use a spoon. But the tricky part about that is making sure that you weigh it, because imagine if it's big chunks, then it's not really, unless you're going to be packing it in there, in which you really want to get as close to accurate as possible. So it's just always easier to weigh, to get a food scale and weigh all of your ingredients, because that's the most accurate way. Because depending on what ingredients you're trying to measure, if it's not in liquid form or powder form, then it's difficult to use measuring spoons, if that makes sense. Like when I went to Africa to make our frozen products, which was vegetables, I couldn't really use measuring cups. It wasn't accurate. So I had to use a scale. So when you're making my meal kits or whatever, they're using the scale, not necessarily measuring tools. So once you do that, then, like I said, you will keep updating and moving things around, and then you can tell what packaging works best for your product. And from that first batch that you do, which maybe some of you have already started, you've been doing your recipe for a while now, this could just help you just to perfect it, to prepare yourself for mass production. Because once we started vetting co-packers, which are like food manufacturing companies that could manufacture our products, it was all about the metrics, and the metrics had to be in ounces, I believe. I think it had to be in ounces or pounds. There was a specific metric that they use, that most of the companies use. I think it's ounces. And so they'll ask you for that, and that's pretty much what they go by. Now with them, you do sign a non-disclosure with them. They have, all of them have contracts that they'll have you sign, that they sign, that prevents them from sharing your recipe. So that's not something to worry about, a company stealing your recipe. But that's the only time. And only after you sign a non-disclosure should you disclose your recipe. Now, I'm not much of a frightful person that I'm afraid of somebody stealing an idea of mine or a recipe product or whatever. I know it does happen, but I'm just not concerned about that, because at the end of the day, nobody can do you better than you. And it's about your branding. It's about the vision that God has given you. Even if somebody stole your recipe and tried to do the same thing as you, they still wouldn't do it the same way that God showed you, because he showed only you. So that's that's a mantra that I carry that just prevents me from ever feeling like I have to be afraid, that somebody will steal my idea or anything. I do try to be cautious the older I get, but for the most part, I trust very easily, because I know that I'm covered and I'm protected, and what's mine is going to be mine. So once you do that and you record that, then you're pretty set on making sure that what kind of packaging is going to work. Is it going to be something that stands up? Is it like a stand-up pouch that works for your recipe? Is it a bottle that works for your recipe? Then you can move into now playing with different packaging, which the next session we'll be talking about packaging. What packaging are you playing around, which you can start playing around, or you probably have already started playing around with different packaging. This is when it comes to, temperature. Are you looking for something that, UV light protected, something that you don't want light to get into it, or sun to get into it, or heat protected, all that good stuff, or something that needs to stay, it needs to go in a freezer. So you need to make sure that your packaging is safe to be in a freezer. It's not going to get frost bites all over it, where people can't even see the product in the freezer, all that good stuff. So once you make your first batch, I always recommend, that was something I did early on, was you just save a portion of your batch, maybe, a container or a bag. If it's a dry product, just save it in your pantry. If it's something that it's going to stay in the refrigerated area in the grocery store, put it in the refrigerator. If it's something that's going to be in the freezer area, then put it in your freezer. And the goal of this is to do your own shelf life testing. Now, you can do it where you pay a food lab to do a shelf life testing for you, to know your expiration date for your product. I have not done that, but I do know the information on how to do it. And I have come across labs that do it. Universities have most over here in Georgia. I know that the big universities that have food labs that have, that are playing with food, chemicals, and all that situation, they offer the services, and it's very a decent amount. I think it's a couple of $100 or so. I'm not sure. Different states might have different pricing, but for me here in Georgia, I'm not sure about different states, but in Georgia, you don't have to have an expiration date if you're a small company that you're selling under a certain amount. So you would have to check with your Department of Agriculture what that exemption is. We have an exemption form here that I had to sign when I first started. And I think it was like 2,000 items per year or something. If you're selling under, it's kind of like taxes where you don't pay taxes if you're making under a certain amount of money. So yeah. So with that, I didn't really have to have an expiration date. So I just estimated what it was. And since it was something that I was doing on a small scale, I didn't have to worry about that. Now you start worrying about that when your products are going nationwide or internationally and all of that good stuff, or when you start going into the big stores. The big stores definitely require an expiration date. But since I was starting with, the mom and pop stores and, the international stores, they weren't so strict on that in the beginning. So, but we eventually did put expiration on our products based on me saving this batch from the beginning. So I saved it for like a year, and after a year I cooked it, it was still good. So we started saying, okay, we can keep it on the shelf for about a year because we've done our own testing. Not that we stopped and we didn't produce our products till we knew that it would stay for a year, because what I did was just guesstimated. I just said, okay, flour takes about 2 years or more, or doesn't expire, or, it takes a long time to expire. Sugar takes about this long. So the products that I was using, what I did was take the expiration of those products and combine them to get a generic estimation of my product. I hope that makes sense. And so I bought my flour from Walmart. So I knew, okay, they have the expiration date here, but my sugar, yeast, all of them were like 2 years out. So I'm like, okay, if they're 2 years out, then I at least can say that my product can last for about a year. And then as time went on, I discovered that it could actually last for about 2 years, and I adjusted the expiration date. So without further ado, I don't know how this is gonna really work out. I pray it does well, but we're gonna actually be doing some peanut butter sauce today. And then we're gonna measure everything, and I actually do want to cook it and actually eat that too. So another thing you gotta make sure of taking note of too is once you buy, which we have that in here, to help you know your pricing, it's easier to just do it all at once. And if you go down in the planner, you have your batch shopping list, so that way you can calculate once you're buying your stuff, right? So I will know that this is the tomatoes that I'm using. I'm using Nature's Sweet Tomato, Let's say this is $5. So I know that, okay, I bought those ingredients, $5 tomatoes, and it came 6 pieces. It was $5 or whatever. It actually has a space in here to calculate your batch amount. Here it is, the calculation. This is the right place. This one is pretty much for when you're in the store or when you're writing down your shopping list of what you need to buy, your shopping list for your packaging, and then any extra notes that you need to take note of, and then how to calculate the actual pricing for each bag. So this is where, the batch amount, how much it costs you, and all of that good stuff that you can just kind of fill out while you're cooking and while you're working on your recipe. If you can't do it all at the same setting, then that's fine. Do your recipe, and then once you're done with your recipe, then you can come back and do the batch calculation. So that was just a quick reminder. So now, if I'm doing tomatoes, I have my onions, I have my ginger, we're gonna actually use peanut butter sauce, like we actually use peanut butter sauce. And then have my seasoning, have my salt, have more seasoning. And you can always, most people do, you can use other company seasoning. You just need to know that, okay, this is what I'm using. It's like your mama Cajun seasoning, and then you always just buy it, and you eventually try to figure out how you can get it wholesale, either online or going to like Restaurant Depot or anything of that sort, which is perfectly fine. So you try to also know which brand tastes better. Like for me, for flour, I had to go through about 7 different types of flour brands to find the taste that I liked. So you do have to cook this several times and try different brands, because trust me, you will think all-purpose flour is the same, but it's not. And I discovered that when I was testing them out. I just tried different flours. So if this is Simple Nature peanut butter, I would try this one. I would try. I would try, Clover Valley. I would try Jiffy, no sugar added. Like just try different brands of the same ingredients that you're using. The same thing goes for even this seasoning. Unless this seasoning is like a secret thing, it's something that's very special to your spices. If it's like a generic product, try different things, even down to your oil, vegetable oil. You'd be surprised that there's one little taste that sets you apart or sets your recipe apart from any other thing. If it's onions, you're trying different onions. Even tomatoes, like try different company brands to know which one tastes the best for your recipe. So for this recipe, which I have no idea what is all good, I have a generic idea in my head of how to make peanut butter sauce, but we're just gonna make it. So for me, what I'm gonna do is blend this whole onions, because it's easier for me to just blend the whole thing instead of trying to measure half an onions or a third of an onions. It's just easier to just blend the whole thing, and then I can easily now measure it. Same thing with my tomatoes, because this recipe doesn't need anything to be chunky inside of it. So let me quickly blend those. Same thing goes for my ginger. And I will be using, I already blended the pepper, jalapeno pepper that I'm using. So that's easy for me to just scoop and put it. So I'm gonna stop talking a little bit and just blend away these items. So I'm using 4 whole tomatoes, yeah? So let's just put, and you don't have to have a perfect whatever. You can make a small batch, you can make a big batch. It just depends on how you want to do it. I would say start with a medium-sized batch or a small batch. If you're used to cooking this thing over and over and you've done it so many times, then it's okay to start with a big batch, because that helps you to not have to do so much math when you're ready to mass produce. So let's say we're doing 4 tomatoes blended. So you're starting with the majority of your ingredients that you're going to use the most. So if tomatoes is your main ingredients, I would say start with that, and then everything else will kind of fall under it. If peanut butter, which peanut butter is my second, actually peanut butter as well is one of the largest ingredient quantities that I will use as well. So I'll start with this too. But the tomato is just a good base to start with my measurement. For me, like let's say for pastry ingredients, that flour, sometimes for the most part is your largest. So you would start with flour and just kind of go from there. So 4 tomatoes. And I'm just gonna blend this up. And you want to make sure you're doing things separately. Do not mix your tomatoes, mix ingredients all together just because you're going to blend them together. You just decide to blend them all together, unless that's part of the recipe. But do not do that from the scratch if you're trying to really get your clear ingredient that goes into your product. You need to know separately what is going in there. That's one of the dangers of using a store-bought seasoning, because you need to know almost, it's almost like you need to know where are the ingredients. There we are. You kind of need to know how much of salt you're using, how much of red pepper, how much of black pepper, garlic, all of that good stuff. So it's recommended for you to really use your own raw ingredients like separately. Like if you know that, okay, this is made up of salt, red pepper, black pepper, and garlic, I would recommend that you actually separate all those ingredients in powder form and try to mimic your own taste to know exactly, because if this company ever went out of business, you're in trouble. If you ever move to manufacture this, mass produce it, it becomes more difficult. So if they went out of business, then you're pretty much screwed because you wouldn't know exactly what was in here. So it's always recommended to use everything from scratch. But if you absolutely cannot, I mean, the chances of something totally going out of business, but it's still important for you to at least know what were the main ingredients, so that if anything ever happens, at least you have something to work with instead of not knowing absolutely what is in there. And another thing also is that all of these ingredients will go on your own product packaging. So you do need to know everything that goes into this seasoning or whatever seasoning that you're using. So to blend tomatoes, of course, you're adding water. Yeah. So measure everything, because what if the consistency is very important? Not even what if, it is going to be important. The consistency is going to be important. So, like I said, you don't use, this is a measuring cup. I'm going to measure, I'll say 1 cup of water and blend it with this. You don't want to miss any step. No step is too little or something to ignore. You have to measure every single thing. Even how long did I blend this for? You need to jot that down. I'm gonna blend this. Oops. Blend with 1 cup water. And it blended for 3 seconds. Blended for 3 seconds on high, pause. It is better to write everything down and not need it than to not write anything. And then later on, when you're trying to mass manufacture years down the road or months down the road, and you're not able to tell them, how long should I blend this for? How many minutes does it go in there for? Now, I'm already realizing that this is not blended properly. It's not blended all the way, and the water is a little bit too much. So I'm going to reblend that. And what we're doing here is not perfection, yeah? Because it's in the imperfection sometimes that we discover. So I blended it for another 12 seconds. So I would just put plus 12 seconds. So like I was saying, it's not about the perfection. Now, this is a little bit more watery than I would like it to be, but I'm still going to try, because what if this is how inventions were made back, like literally a lot of great products that we like nowadays. Somebody made a mistake somewhere and then they invented something completely new. So it's not about perfection, because you're going to do this over and over for a couple of times and over a period of time for you to perfect it. But it's not about perfection. So this is kind of a little bit more liquid than I would like, but that's okay. So we'll move on to the next ingredient that we're using. We're using 1 onions. We're blending 1 onions. And I want to use the whole, I think I'll use half of this. And the reason I don't want to measure the onions or any other fresh ingredients, because you never know the size that you're going to get. Yeah. And I'll show you an example. This is all in the same bag, but this is bigger than this. So if you say, oh, 1 onions or 1 tomato, which one are you talking about? That's a huge difference. So that's why it's better if you have to measure or write down your recipe in puree form or in powder form or in diced, extremely diced form. So that way you have a better understanding. So I'm just going to blend this, but I'm not going to write it down because I'm not measuring the whole thing. I'm actually going to use half of this, whatever half of this is in and same thing like I was saying with the onions. If I'm using onions for a recipe, I would try red onions. I would try white onions. I would try the small ones, the big ones, because you would be very surprised. The thing that sets my recipe apart literally is the flour. It is not even the fact that I may be the only one making the best, beignets ever or anything. It was from me trying different flours that I discovered the best flour that would be extra fluffy and taste really, really good for that recipe. And this is not going to be a very long cook, which is another thing to record. Like you're recording your blending time, you're recording your cooking time. If it's a cooked product, if it's not a cooked product, you still want to cook. Of course, you're still going to cook it because your packaging will come with instructions for the buyer. So they need to know how long are they going to cook the sauce for, or how long are they going to bake what you're baking for. All of us have seen that on, the packaging that you buy from the grocery store. You see them that they have the cooking time and all of that. You need to make sure that you get to as close to perfect as possible, because there are a lot of times that I will buy some products and it didn't come out the way it was supposed to come out. The instructions were not proper. I can tell from the fact that I was not able to follow the instructions and duplicate it exactly. Blend this. So we're blending this. I would blend this with probably 1/4 of a spoon of water, 1/4 of a cup. Blend 1 onion with 1/4 cup of the H2O. And I'm just doing it, even though I'm not using 1 onion as a measurement, I still just want to know just for knowing. That was a small onion, so let me make sure I put 1 small onion just to be on the safe. Okay, we have our onions. Just put in here. And I blended that for 30 seconds. So we have our onions. And I'll put on here how long I blended it for. 30 seconds. All right. What's the next thing? Ginger. which is now hard because now I have to blend. Which is why it's kind of better if you can find all of this. If your recipe would permit it to have dry powder form of onions, dry powder form of ginger, if your recipe would permit you to do that, then it's so much easier to do it that way because you don't have to go through all of this. You could have just used, your your measuring spoons to measure all of that. But since I'm trying to make sure, since it's the flu is going around and cold and COVID and all of that, I want to kind of use fresh ginger, and I want to kind of have some in the fridge so we can use. So that's the reason. If not, on a normal circumstance, if I was doing this, I would try the powder form to see if it would taste, as close to the same as possible. And if the difference is not that much, then I would go with the powder form. But if it's up to you and what you're trying to, this is where you get to decide what is the brand of your company. Are you guys, making sure that the quality, are you saying is your tagline or your company going to be known for using fresh ingredients? Or is it that it's more about the convenience of the recipe being already ready? Is it convenience you're selling? Is it going to be the fact that your ingredients are fresh, or you source, you see on in the grocery store where they'll even say, locally sourced ingredients. This is where you get to decide. After you're doing all of this, you get to decide what is the integrity, what is the mantra, what is it that your company or your brand is going to stand for. So for me, frozen products, we only use organic, fresh ingredients that are in Africa. And so I have to go package it in Africa. I can make it in America because here it's not even possible. It would not be fresh ingredients and it will not be the same thing. So get to decide. Again, I'm going to use half a cup of water to blend it. Now, that wasn't enough water, so the ginger puree, which I don't really need to measure that. The water wasn't enough, so I'm going to add another half a cup. So if I had already put half a cup, then I would just add another half a cup next to it. Then later on, when I'm trying to get it, let's make sure you can see. Later on, when I'm trying to transfer it onto a cleaner part, I can just add this and know that, okay, it's 1/8 or whatever that is. This is in puree form. It's good enough for me. I'm not gonna use too much of it anyway, so that's fine. All right, so we've blended that. We've blended all our purees. We have our tomatoes, we have our ginger, onions. So you have all your ingredients now prepped. You haven't even started measuring yet. Just prep. Now we can start cooking and measure. Turn my fire on. So now we're gonna measure how much oil, vegetable oil, how much vegetable oil we're using. And I'm thinking, 1 cup of oil. Yeah, I think 1 cup of oil should be okay. No, 1 cup would be too much. Just half a cup. Yes, we'll do half a cup of oil. Perfect. That looks like the amount I want. So I'll put down in my notes, half a cup. And then of course my onions. Let's just transfer this over here. Let's say onions, we will use 1/4 of a cup of onion. And then you have to also put, when you're cooking, you got to know what temperature, what number is your stove on. So medium high, of course, is about what, 6, since mine goes from 0 or 1 to 8. So I have it on 6. So on the cooking instruction part, you got to be putting the temperature as well. So cook oil for until hot, or for 2 minutes, or until hot, whichever way is easier, at mid-high temperature. You can put it that way. And then, so let's use our measurements. All right. And you want to make sure it's leveled when you're measuring. You want to make sure it's leveled. Again, we're not going for perfection, but we want to be as close as possible. So I think I'm going to reduce the heat. That was a little bit too much. So I'm going to do it to medium, not medium high. Let's just leave it at medium, so it doesn't cook so quickly when you put the onions in. And you got to record, how long are you going to cook the onions for, right? Cook onions So you start timing. Once you put the onions in here, we put it in here at 3:56. It's 3:57 right now. So I'm going to time at what point do I add the next ingredients, if it matters. If it doesn't matter, then you can kind of just mix everything in there. But if it does matter, then you make sure that you're keeping tab of the timing, if timing is important. Some people, so imagine somebody who doesn't know how to cook at all. Yeah. So you're trying to give as detailed of an explanation as possible, where if you were not there, would they make it exactly the way you will make it? And then for the ginger, so we'll let it cook onions for 2 minutes. Then let's add half a tablespoon, half tablespoon ginger paste. And then I'm gonna put another half a tablespoon of pepper, of habanero pepper, half tablespoon pepper. And exactly the same thing with the pepper. Like you measure your pepper, how much, I mean, you try different types of pepper. Is habanero the best for you? Is red peppers, what pepper works best for your recipe? So it's always good to try different ingredients from different countries. Maybe Mexico pepper is best, or maybe African pepper is actually best. Like those are the little things that set your recipe apart. When you start doing those little things to try different ingredients out, that's when you really start feeling like a whole shelf, because now it's like you're playing with different things. Yeah. All right, let me put some salt in. I think half a tablespoon of salt will be good. Half tablespoon, table salt. You have to be as specific as possible. If you're using sea salt, if you're using pink Himalayan salt, those are the difference. Those are those little things that you want to try it out. You know, you don't have to try it out all in the same day, but eventually start trying different things out. So half a tablespoon. Would that be too much? Let's see, how much tomato do I have? Nope, that'll be okay. Yeah. Half a tablespoon of salt. And I'm using table salt. Usually I also use, pink Himalayan salt, all of that. All right. Peanut butter. I'm going to measure that. And then tomato paste. Let me do the tomato first because the tomato has to cook. So I'm going to use all of this tomato that I actually made, which I still need to measure. I haven't measured this yet. So I'm going to use the bigger cup to measure it and to know exactly how much tomato paste is this. So that if I wanted to use maybe the canned tomatoes, I can easily know the quantity that I need. For this, fill this up. This is about 2 cups. Again, like I said, you're not using your hands, you're not using guesstimate, you are literally using measuring spoons to cook. So that was, let me make sure I see, that was 16 ounce, which was 2 cups. So I'm going to put 2 cups. And I'll put 16 ounce since I already know the 16 ounce was right there. and then plus whatever this is. And this is 4 ounces. This is half a cup. All right. Plus 4 ounces, which is also half a cup. As many metrics as you can write down, it solves a lot of problems later on. So then for this recipe, I need this to cook for a little bit before I add I'm gonna put it on high. So I'll say let's let it cook for maybe 5 minutes or so, but I'm watching. So from now, once I put the tomatoes, which is the major ingredient that I need to be cooked, because the other ingredients don't really need to be time specific. And again, remember, you're writing your cooking instruction for your audience, for your buyer, and you're writing the recipe for you or for the manufacturer. So don't get confused about all what we're writing down. Now it's just scribble scrabble, but later on, then that's why you have many pages to go through, so you can clean it up and actually make it look, where you have a exact, simpler measurement of everything and cooking instruction of everything. But when you're cooking, if you don't need to remember, if the instructions over here is for you and then the instruction as well for your clients, just have that in mind, because you're doing double work when you're doing this. You're thinking about you remaking this exact recipe, and the person that's gonna buy your product, even if it's the finished product, then that's fine. If it's like a cooked product that all they need to do is warm it up, or warm it up in the microwave for 2 seconds, which you try it out and how much time they will do it, then that's fine. Then this instruction is going to be strictly for the manufacturer or for you remaking this recipe. But you need to write down every single detail as possible. I can't emphasize on that enough. So I'm going to be using some Maggi, and I think I'll use half a tablespoon as well, because why not? And for this one, I'm going to use, let's write that down. And then let's use half a tablespoon of this as well. That should be that for my seasoning. So you literally have these things in your hand and you're just guesstimating based on your, cooking this ingredient before. You're kind of guesstimating, you're eyeballing it, but you're using the spoons with your eyeball and with your guesstimation to get as close to perfect as possible. From this point, I can start tasting it to kind of see if, yeah, that salt was too much. I will need to reduce that later on. But it works. That salt was too much. And you know what? I'm going to improvise. Since I put too much salt for what I was going for, I'm going to add 2 more tomatoes. Real quick. So you write down next to your note that you added 2 more tomatoes. And I'm gonna add that in. And of course, you know the routine. You measure it in the cup. I didn't do that right now because that would just be me repeating the same thing. But you measure the puree and put it in there. But since I'm not actually making, I'm just doing it for show. I didn't really write that down, but you can measure it. We're gonna let that cook, and then we're gonna taste it again. Do we need to add? Yep, that's good. I'm going to add a little bit more of ginger. I'm gonna add another 1/2 tablespoon of ginger. Again, use your measuring spoon. And I'm gonna add another 1/2 tablespoon of pepper. I love pepper. I love spicy food. And I didn't taste the pepper in it that much. So while it's cooking, you can just be tasting it and, making sure. Now, if this was like a pastry product or whatever, of course, from the dough, when you've mixed the dough and whatnot, you taste the dough and you know to add a little bit this, a little bit that. But the key here is not that I'm showing you guys a recipe. I just want you to be used to using spoon because we can easily forget. And when you forget, like you see how I put that tomato paste in there without measuring? If I was actually creating a recipe, literally, I would have to do that all over again. That's how simple and complicated it is. I would have to redo the whole thing or at least guesstimate what that was, but then it wouldn't be exact. So I would have to guesstimate, but guesstimating will not make it taste the same. So it is very, very important to remember the one thing all that we're doing here is just to make sure that we're measuring. And as we're adding, we're writing down. As we add, we write down. As we add, we write down. And that's pretty much it. And once you do that, then you're set to go. Then you have a recipe written down that even when you're no longer here, you see how people have, recipes for generations and they have companies, trade secrets and all of that. Nobody still knows the recipe for Coca-Cola, So this is, it's not a complicated process. This is where the magic happens, as they would say. Let me try to get this out as much as I can. I'm probably going to use about, for this recipe, I think I'm going to actually use the whole jar of peanut butter, which makes it a lot easier. So I can just record. I can just record how many ounces this is. This is 16 ounces of peanut butter. So I'll write that down. And I'll also write down 1 jar. So that way, if I'm rebuying, buying this again, I know 1 jar of peanut butter is enough for my recipe. And this is pretty much the last ingredients, and this will be done. I do not know. I guess this peanut butter has stayed in so long in the pantry. All right, let's and 16 ounces of peanut butter. Now I'm just gonna let this cook. And that is pretty much it for this sauce. All right, I think you pretty much got the gist. So I'm gonna put this on low to cook. Then we're gonna go back on video. So